Hey, everybody. Good evening, good evening, good evening. I know this is kind of a surprise. It's not a surprise live. I typically do go live on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, but I didn't give y'all any advance notice about today's topic. So let me pull up my notes. Um, Part of Hold on. Where's my jacket? Hold on. I'm a little too bosomy. All right. I'm giving y'all a little too much cleavage. A little more than I was intending to. Okay. That's a little better. Hey, everybody. Glad y'all could join me. Um, like I said, I normally give you some kind of some kind of heads up about what we're going to talk about. And I didn't do that today because I was in the streets. I was running the streets, but that's okay. Um, about, I think a lot of you saw Rashida Dow's video from over the weekend. Her channel is Sheeta on the Loose, where we went to what is called Paseo Nocturno, an event that used to be held pretty often here in Mexico City before the pandemic. The last one, it's like a nighttime bike ride, walk, skate, run, whatever. Um, um, and it's held at night because they closed down the most famous street in the city, Avenida Reforma. And it's just kind of a cool thing to be out there to hang out. And so we did that on Saturday night. They do it on Sunday mornings, but this is the first time they had a night ride in 2 years, because I think the last one was in March, right before they shut everything down. And being there Saturday night just reminded me of all the things I love about living here, about living abroad. And so if you don't know what I'm talking about, make sure you go over to Sheeta's channel. Sheeta's on the Loose, and it's the video, I think it's called Mexico City at Night. But that got me thinking about, like my life before I left the US versus my life now, and how it's different, and what I like about it and what I don't like about it, and what I miss from the US versus things I don't. So I thought that's what we would talk about today. So I have some notes, I have my list, but also I am curious to hear, for those of you that have already made the jump and left the US, what are the things you love about living outside the US? Also, the things that are not so great, because one of my concerns is I never want to just focus on the positive and, oh, this life is so great and it's so awesome, and not keep it real with y'all and not be transparent about the parts of it that are not so great. So my list here. If you're watching this on the replay, thanks for joining. Hey, if you're new here and you're like, what is this video that I have stumbled across? Welcome to my channel. I'm Adelia Borchade, although most people know me as Picky Girl Travels the World. And on this channel, we talk all things travel, we talk all things moving, living abroad, and we talk about the finances and how to manage them so that you can live that life, or really live whatever life you want. So if you're new, thanks for coming. And if you haven't, make sure you subscribe. I thought about, like, if I had to make a list of the things that I like about this life that I have been living for the last 6 years. 6 years ago, about 6 years ago, this time, early March, I had decided to leave the US. I had accepted a position at a very tiny, teeny tiny school in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and I really had no idea what life was going to have in store for me, what it was going to look like living in that country, which at the time was home to two of the most murderous cities in the world. I'm sure Honduras would like to be known for other things, but at the time that I was moving abroad in 2016, and the first thing you do when you start to do your research is you do a Google, and I Google Honduras, living in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. And I'm going to be real with y'all, not a whole lot of positive things came up. Um, that didn't really deter me, but I didn't know what this new life I was embarking on was going to be like. I didn't know what to expect. I moved to a country that did not have a lot of foreigners in it. It's not a destination for people leaving the US. Most of the foreigners there were with the military, the US military, or they worked for the State Department. Um, and so, when I think about my life abroad over the last 6 years, that includes my time in Honduras, that includes time in Mexico, that includes time in China, and that includes time in Kuwait, but also the time I've spent traveling while I've been based in those various countries. So, putting together a list of, like, what are the things I love about living outside the US, or what are the best things versus the worst? It was a little harder to put that list together than I thought. Um, these are not in any particular order. And I guess maybe we'll start with the negatives or the not so great things. Um, and some of these may sound a little silly, but this is what I came up with. In no particular order, one of the worst things about living abroad is I can't find anybody to cut my hair. I typically have a lot of hair, although right now I only have 1/3 of a head of hair. I know it looks like I have more, but I don't. But being able to go to a salon and have people know how to do your hair, how to get a good haircut, get your ends cut, like, I miss that. And I don't have that. I have not had that in almost 6 years. Um, and that's hard. Um, yeah, I miss that. Um, something else that's this is somewhat difficult. A lot of people will talk about the products from the US that they miss. I don't I don't miss a whole lot of particular products. I will say, like getting a good chocolate chip cookie made with butter that has the right amount of crispness, but the right amount of sweetness and all that. That's a hard thing because I have not lived in a single country that knew how to make a chocolate chip cookie the way we do in the US. But like, you know, specific products, pretty much I've been able to make do in every country I've lived in. I've been able to find some kind of substitute for almost everything. But the ease of going to, let's say, a Target and knowing that when I go in this store, they're going to have everything I want. It's going to be in stock. They're going to be cool products like that. That's, I guess, the downside is we don't have those favorite stores like Trader Joe's. On my recent trip to the US, I visited a Trader Joe's and was reminded of all the wonderful things that I don't have. And I know that doesn't seem like a super big deal, but it is one of the things I miss. Um, those are things I can't get, not really, not here. Um, Reliable mail service. This is a big bummer about living in the US, living outside the US. I don't think we realize how good we have it in the US. Um, I don't think, let me turn that down. Is that better? I don't know. I don't think we realize, I think we really take the US Postal Service for granted. This idea that you can put an envelope or a package in the mail, and with the last few years of the pandemic excluded, you had virtual certainty that it would get where it was supposed to go and it would get there in a reasonable amount of time. Before I left the US, I couldn't fathom living in a place where that was not true. I mean, the first country I moved to, Honduras, basically didn't even have a postal service at all. There was no way to mail something in the sense that we know. If you wanted to send somebody a letter or a package, you could either have it like pay somebody to deliver it to them directly, or you put it on the bus and the bus would take it to their town and they'd have to go to the bus station to pick it up. Some friends sent me a care package with some peanut butter in it, and they were in Utila, one of the Bay Islands. They brought it with them from the US. They had to go to the airport in the Bay Islands in Honduras. They had to ship it on an airplane to Tegucigalpa, and I had to go to the airport specifically to pick up this package. There was no way for them to mail it to me, and that just blew my mind. Um, I all of the things we take for granted, like getting Amazon, sending somebody a Christmas card, that kind of stuff. That that wasn't possible when I lived there. I have since lived in countries that have had some form of a postal service, but again, I haven't had the kind of security of knowing if somebody mails me something, I will actually get it. That's been a struggle, especially if you are in a country trying to receive mail in a language that is not English. So, like the people in the US who would mail me something in China or in the UK would mail me something in China, they would write this stuff in English. And I don't know if the people at the post office can read English. It's not in Mandarin. Would I actually get the package? Just recently, I ordered something from the US. They sent it US Postal Service, where you like track where it's going and all of that. That's great until it gets to Mexico. Once it hits Mexico, there is no more tracking. All they can tell you is it has arrived. And after that, from the people I've talked to, it's like pretty much just wait a couple of months and see if it shows up. It might show up, it might not. Um, it took my package, I ordered like January 4th. It arrived in Mexico January 13th. There was an attempt to deliver it like February 12th, maybe. So like a month. And I had to pay customs. The customs, when my package came into the country, they opened it. They saw what it was and they decided, oh, she needs to pay taxes on it. And so they delivered a notice that said how much I had to pay, blah, blah, blah. So that's I think a downside. What Jones say, I started getting Christmas cards from the US last week. Yeah, no, seriously, when you ask, especially in this country, in Mexico, when you ask people about like, oh, I want to mail XYZ to somebody, they're like, yeah, I mail my Christmas cards about 2-3 months early. That way, if they show up roughly around Christmas time. So that's something that's not so great about living outside the US. Now, I am curious, are there any of you that are currently living abroad that want to share, like what are the downsides to that? Or those of you that are thinking about living abroad, what is it that you are concerned about? What are some possible negatives that you are concerned about? D talks about already thinking I have to fly back to the US at least twice a year to get my hair done. Once I break free, I'm bleach blonde, kinky curly hair. So I need someone with experience. Yeah. Yeah. I have yet to live in a country where I was comfortable letting somebody who did not look like me do my hair. And so far, all that's been is braids. I have not let anybody color my hair. I did, okay, let me amend that. I did when I got the sides of my hair shaved. Um, I did that here in Mexico, but the guy had lived in the US. He'd lived in Chicago for a really, really long time. So and he spoke English. So he understood what I was looking for. But all he could do was cut the sides. The rest, it was a no-go. Um, Another thing that is potentially okay, I see Janice says missing friends and family. Where I live now, that's not an issue for me. I did not choose to move to Mexico because of its proximity to the US, but that has been an added bonus that if I need to see my children or if they need me, I am about an hour and a half flight, an hour and a half, 2 hour flight away from them. That is an added bonus. But when I lived on the other side of the world, there was no drop everything and fly home. Like it was going to take me at least a day to get back. But I so far we've been able to keep in touch with, using technology, video calls, that kind of stuff. And so that hasn't been a big issue. But I am also somebody with a really, really small family. So maybe if I had a larger family, that would be a bigger issue for me. Um, I would add to the list of negatives or like what's the worst thing about living this life. And it is, I'm not sure how to put this, but I lived in the US for 41 years. I lived in my home country, speaking my native language. You move through the world, you move through the systems that are set up with a certain amount of surety that I no longer have because I'm in a new system. I'm learning how this system operates. I had to start over from scratch. So the worst part is that lack of knowing what to do and how to do it. And I see a few people talking about like medical emergencies, that sort of thing. Yeah, like one for me, especially during the pandemic or during the height of the pandemic, because technically the pandemic is still going on, but during the height of the pandemic, I was concerned like, okay, if I do get sick enough that I need to be hospitalized, what does that look like? How do I get to the hospital? And in the US, that would be a phone call and they would send an ambulance. Well, I discovered here that like for a city of 20-ish million people, there are only like 35 or 45 ambulances run by the city. All the other ones are private. So it was like, oh, so that's a thing I need to navigate. I need to have the number of a specific ambulance company to make sure that, like it's the kind of ambulance that I would want. Like, who would have thought of that? I would not have known that. Um, things like that. I see Joan said something about customer service. I thought Joan did, maybe not. But yeah, like, yeah, understanding customer service is not the same or non-existent. Like, yeah, how you get things done. Whereas previously, it might have been a phone call to a company, to a government office to get the information I want or find out what I need. That may not be the case. Like when I lived in China, I did not speak Mandarin. So that wasn't going to work. Here in Mexico, particularly Mexico City, a lot of times to get the information you want, you need to go to the place in person and ask somebody. Because relying on what's online, on what's on the website, is going to leave you stuck out most of the time. So that, again, I feel like I knew how things worked in the US. Every time you move to a new country, that's something else you have to learn, the ins and outs of that. And I'm this is my second time living in Mexico City. I've been here a year and 7 months this time, and there's still so much I don't think I know. I don't think I know. I'm seeing what y'all saying in the comments. Um, Rashida say the website is a lie, all of them. Yeah, like, because, okay, you think about how you handle things. Think about what your day would look like in the US if, in order to handle business, you could not just go on some place's website and get the information you need or make a phone call, that you had to physically go and do that. Like, it changes how you move around and how you do things. Um, that has been a big one. And the lack of confidence, like, I think I got a good beat on things, but I don't have the level of sureness that I had when I lived in the US. Um, when I lived in China, China made no sense at all. People complain about how things are done here in Mexico, but for me, China made absolutely no sense. And trying to navigate anything with government offices or businesses, it was just always a struggle. And so having to do that on a daily basis, that's not so great. That's not so great. Um, let's see what else. So I think that, like, my list of the worst things about living this life is fairly short. It's just those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that I could really think of. Um, yeah, it wasn't a super long list. Now, the things that are the best about living this life, about living outside the US, um, they that's there's a little bit more on that list than the other. Okay, I see several people asking in the comments about how to, like, have I had a situation where I had to go to the hospital? What was my experience? That sort of thing. I have not, but I did talk to 3 ladies. Joan is one of them. Roxanne and Kina all had experiences with health emergencies outside the US. And we talked about the differences they found with the different systems that they found themselves in and how you handle things. So let me grab the link for that, and I will drop it in the chat. Um, how to handle emergencies abroad. I'll drop that link in the chat, and I will add it to the description. if you I cannot stress to y'all enough. If you have not watched this video, you really should, because there are a lot of things to learn about, like, so that when you're planning your move to another country, what are some questions you can ask? What are some things you can do to make sure that if something goes wrong, you are as prepared as possible. Juliet asks, how do you handle your mental health during the transition? Um, that's a good question. And for me personally, I can't say that I've done anything specific to to handle that, other than approaching each new country with very few expectations. I think expectations that things will work the way they did back home sets you up for struggle. It's just kind of like, okay, let's figure out, how do they do things here in China? How do they do things in Mexico? How do they do things in Kuwait? What does that look like? Who looks like they know what's going on? So I just try and come with as few expectations as possible, but I can't say that you know, I've ever had to like give a whole lot of thought to my mental health. I guess that's maybe because my attitude as a whole is fairly laid back. I'm not trying to let things stress me out too much. I don't fret about things that I don't have direct control over, and so that may have helped with not to having that that struggle. Um, so yeah, let me see if I missed any other question before we move on to my best list. Let's see. Urgent care. My husband's not on board 100%. Okay. All right. So, um, so yeah, I told y'all about my struggle about not being able to get my hair done, and not being able to get or reliably send mail places. But that doesn't mean that like this life is just full of suckiness, because that's not true. Um, in no particular order. Um, One of the best things about living this life, living outside the US, is I studied history and geography in school, and I'm a historian, a geographer. So being able to live in places and experience the culture firsthand and be like, oh, this is the thing that I learned about, or I read this about this in a book, that has been very cool. I think geographers tend to be, we study people, we study places. And so living outside the US gets you like, it's like field work. It's like firsthand field work, and that's pretty awesome. Um, I think one of the best things, or I definitely noticed this after I left the U.S., the use of public space. Public space is not something I gave a lot of thought to when I lived in the US. If you think about how we live our lives, it's about my house, my neighborhood, my apartment, my complex. This is the strip mall I go to get my nails done. This is where I go to out to eat. This is where I go to this other thing. But think about most people, or at least my experience in the US, public space. I'm talking about parks or esplanades in the road, or, just fountains, places where people can just kind of sit, relax, read a book, just be. Maybe, Sherwood Anderson, maybe you're right, because it's a very car centric culture in most of the US. Um, but it's about I go to these places to do this thing and then I go back with my life. Well, when I left the US, one of the things that struck me was how people lived and existed in public places. That would be if there's a fountain, or the fact that there are like fountains and statues and little pocket parks that are there because they look nice, because they would encourage people to stop and sit and just be. Like, I don't, at least the way I live my life in the US, that was not part of it. And so I appreciate how that is a part of the culture. That's a part of how people live their lives in these different countries that I've been in. Now, what it looked like from one country to another was different. Like in Kuwait, because it's a million degrees outside, life revolved around malls during the day. Malls, because people, Kuwaitis got a lot of money, so they shop, they go out to eat. But in the mall, there are places to lounge, that sort of thing. When the sun would go down, outside of restaurants, whatnot, you would find people sitting, just kind of hanging out. Like, I don't feel like we do that a lot in the US. Um, it's very much about this is my space. Less so much, unless there is a specific event like, oh, we're going to do the Italian festival. And then people are going to go to that event to buy stuff. Um, an esplanade. What do you call that patch of grass in the middle of a road? Is that not an esplanade? But yeah, you're right, Joan. People who are not from the US may not know that that's what it's called. Um, oh, that's one of the things that I'm often struck by here in Mexico City is there are benches in places I would not expect there to be benches, and that people just sit on them. Like, they're not doing anything, they're just sitting for an indiscriminate amount of time. Like, I don't recall doing that or seeing that in the US. And Monica, I think you're right. You sit on a public bench too long, you'll be the talk of a thread in the next door group. People are like, who is this? Why are they sitting there? Think about that. So that's I've noticed in the various countries I've lived in, and again, it's looked different. The use of public space, how people live in those public spaces and connect with other people, that has been very cool. In China, or at least in Hefei, where I lived, at night in the area around the mall, and I'm trying to help you envision this. In the US, the area around a mall is a giant parking lot. That was not the case for these malls. But at night, there are kids playing, somebody is playing a music, and people are getting together and practicing line dances and that kind of stuff. So, like, we just didn't do stuff like that in the US. I would see that happen on street corners as well. So that is one of the things I really like about this life, is that how people use public space, and it's okay to just be in a public space and not do anything. Just sit there because it's a pretty day out and I feel like sitting on this bench for a little bit. Like, that's pretty cool to me. Yeah, they know how to just be. I don't think I really understood that that was a thing until I left the US. Um, this next one is not going to come as a shock. If you've been watching any of my videos or you've been following me for a while, one of my favorite things is, and this is kind of related to the living in public space thing, bakeries, cafe culture. And I know you're thinking, but Adelia, we have bakeries in the US. Do you? Like, do you go to the bakery because you want a muffin or you want a croissant, like a singular one? Or do you go to the bakery because you need a cake for a party? You need a large number of things for an event. When I was in the US last month, I kept thinking, like I'd love an almond croissant, but I was like, where would I even go to get that here? Like, where is the bakery where I don't have to buy a dozen of things? I can just go in there and buy this one thing and then sit at a little table and enjoy it and maybe read a book. I really like that, and I have found that um, in these, yeah, like, okay, mom and pop kind of places. And I struggled when I was in Houston last month, trying to think of, do I even know of a place like that? Um, that people just get together and hang out, like they grab a coffee or a hot chocolate or whatever, and they just sit in a cafe and chit chat, and they might do that, um, for a few hours. And nobody's stressed about it. Nobody's like, oh, we got to buy X amount of stuff if we're going to be occupying this table, um, or we've got to get out of here because they need to turn the table over. I've liked that a lot. Okay. Italian bakeries, cafe is Starbucks. See, and I guess you can do that to a certain degree at a Starbucks, but outside of Starbucks, is there? I don't know. I don't know. But that's one of the things that I have liked about my life now, is that, like, oh, I can just pop in, get me a little nosh, or if I just want to sit here and read, like I can do that, and nobody's tripping about it. Um, the next thing on my list, mass transit. That has been one of the best things about living outside the US. And maybe if you're watching this and you live in the US and you live on the East Coast, you're like, oh, well, we have mass transit. Well, let me tell you, in Texas, we don't. In Houston, we don't. There literally was no way to get around uh, if I didn't have a car and I did not want it to take me 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours. I love living in places where I can easily take a train or something else. Now that I say that, I might qualify it a little bit. I was having a conversation today about the struggle of figuring out city buses, because I've not, here in Mexico City, the city buses, there are levels to city buses, and I'm trying to work my way up and figure them out. It's a struggle. When I lived in Honduras, the city buses don't have, they have routes, but they're not published anywhere. You just go stand on the corner where you see other people standing, and hopefully you speak enough Spanish and you can ask, hey, where does this bus go? Um, but to be able to easily navigate, and I think that goes hand in hand with like not having to drive, which I never thought I would say that that was a great thing about living abroad or living my life, because I was like everybody else at 16 years old. I wanted a car. All I wanted was to get my license. But when I find myself in situations where I have to drive now, like when I go back to the US, I find it to be exhausting. I'm like, oh, I got to drive over there and there. I have found myself actually cutting down on places I want to go because I don't feel like driving. Um, so it's, yeah, like I really like living places that have mass transit. And in the pandemic, that's been a little bit of a struggle, uh, feeling safe on them. But now that numbers are lower, and we seem, at least here, to have gotten a lot better about how we wear our masks. People were wearing masks, they were just wearing them improperly. It's a good thing. F Doctor says, I would think the best thing about living abroad is to have options. Options to live 6 months in a country, another country. Yeah, I think if you're somebody like, I think I told myself that that's where I was going to go. I was going to kind of do 6 months here or 6 months there. But so far, I have not felt the pull to live that life. That may change in the future, but so far, not feeling it. But yeah, so how people use public spaces, bakery, cafe culture life, that cafe culture, because it's not just there are these individual places. There's a culture and an expectation that I like. Mass transit. Um, a bonus, I did not expect this, is community. I have met some of the most incredible people, in particular women, after leaving out of the United States. I don't know if it is the kind of women who make that jump just seem to be really, cool as hell or whatever, but the community that I have been able to build since I have left the US, it's been pretty great. Um, oh, okay. Yes, I am, Rashida. I am talking about you. Um, it 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 has been like I've met incredible women, and these are like I wasn't meeting these kinds of women when I was still in the US. So I don't know why it's happening, but it's awesome as hell, and I'm glad it has happened. Um, Another thing I would put on my list of best things about living outside the US is not just the affordability of healthcare. It's not just that I should not bankrupt myself if I were to have an unexpected illness. It's not just that, but it is also the accessibility piece of it. And let me explain what I mean by that. Because even when I lived in Honduras, which is not a place with a solid healthcare system, really, COVID pretty much annihilated the healthcare system there. But the accessibility, the fact that you can communicate directly with the doctor. The doctor may have your WhatsApp, or if you, because y'all know I don't like to call people on the phone, but that I can send a text, a WhatsApp message to the doctor and get that feedback in a very, very short period of time. Like, I didn't know people were living like that. When I was in the US, that was unheard of. Because even like when I would take my kids to the doctor and the nurses, when you're done with the doctor and the nurse is checking you out and you're getting ready to go pay, um, they'd be like, well, yeah, just call back to the office. And I would think about like the struggle I had to go through to get transferred to the nurse to get my question answered or to give whatever information. So to live in places where literally I could message the doctor directly, like that just blows my mind every time. I That blows my mind. But yes, I can breathe a little easier because I don't have the same worry that if I go to the hospital, this is going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how else to say that. So that has been good. And even in China, which is not one of my favorite places, um, you know, in the rest of the world, when you live abroad, you use WhatsApp to text back and forth. In China, WhatsApp is not allowed. We used WeChat. And one of the built in features in WeChat is you can translate any text message. So, even if the doctor and I did not speak the same language, I could still text and ask my questions and get answers that way. Joan mentioned, not sure if they do this in Mexico City, but here they make house calls. Yeah, that is a thing here. And before I left the US, I thought that was just something they had in old movies. I didn't know there were still people in the 21st century who made house calls because, well, I knew really, really rich people in the US could get a doctor to come to their house. But, like, what does that cost? Does that cost like the amount of a small used car? Like, I don't even know. Um, I couldn't even wrap my head around that. And then now here, the question is, oh, do you want me to come to your house or are you just gonna come in the office or whatever? Like that blows my mind completely. And the last thing I have on my list, and I don't know, this might be a little bit contentious or controversial, is American privilege. As a Black American woman, I have never experienced privilege in that way until I left the US. Now, y'all know I'm not ignoring that there are times when our American privilege can be not a great thing, like to the detriment of other people. I'm not talking about that, but the idea that you are seen as a person first and not as a stereotype, not as this negative thing, not as a criminal, not as a threat, that, you can release some of the stuff that we carry with us existing in the US as Black people. That has been, it's been new, and it's kind of been, I don't know what the word is for it, definitely interesting. um and it's been an interesting thing to navigate because, again, in my own home country, I'm not taken at just my word. Like, when I interviewed Kayla on the podcast, she talked about like going into a place and reserving a restaurant solely on her word. I don't know that that would work the same way in the US, because when you look like this, there are certain assumptions made about you. Um, and being an American, I don't know that I felt very American in the US. Wasn't it? What's the guy's name in the US government? And I should know this, but y'all, I've kind of divested of a lot of current events in the US right now, where they were talking about voter suppression, and he said something about Blacks, and then he said something about Americans, as if Black folks are not Americans. So yeah, I don't know that I ever felt like an American until I left the US. Now, am I saying that outside the US I have not had to deal with racism? Y'all know that's not what I'm saying. Y'all know that's not what I'm saying. Mitch McConnell, that's who it was. That's who it was. But I I didn't even know. I don't know that I knew I didn't really feel like an American when I was in the US until I left. And it's a weird thing. Now, because of how we are treated in our own country, and because we pay attention to things differently when we are in other countries. So where I think most Black Americans, when they leave the US, we pick up on the American privilege that we have, but we're also cognizant of the folks that don't have privilege. And we have lived lives without privilege. So I almost would say we don't abuse that privilege when we're other places. I would say the majority of us. Lovely Day says, I think that's why a lot of Black Americans who have the ability to live abroad prefer to. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Okay, let me see, what else are y'all saying? Yeah. The blue passport, there is a lot of privilege with it, although there are times when I would rather people not see my passport. But yeah, there definitely are. And again, like, who was it telling the story about at Heathrow? A black family in front of us was grilled up one side, down the other. Uh, they were wearing, God look, barely looked at y'all's passports because you're Americans. Like, I, being black in the US, we are prepared for that. We're prepared for what the struggle is going to be. And then when you get there and it's like, oh, you're an American, go through, you're kind of like, what? Huh? It's sort of surreal. It's sort of surreal. So those are the things that I've been thinking about, like, what are some of the things I like about this life or that have been really good versus the things that are not great. I don't know if y'all have got anything you want to add to that or ask. I'm going through the comments to see. Okay, but do they still have a lot of stereotypes about Black people, even in Mexico? That's a good question. And it's, I think, hard for me to answer because I feel like here it's not about you are a Black person, it is about where you are from. So the way I am treated versus somebody who might be Haitian or somebody who might be from Congo is different. And so it's in this country, it is hard to unwrap the Americanness from the color. In a lot of my experience, when people talk to me and they ask those questions like, oh, where are you from? One, the assumption generally is if I haven't opened my mouth, if I have, or even if I have been speaking English, the assumption is rarely that I'm from the US. I remember last year we were out in the country at some waterfalls, and a Mexican gentleman who was with us, somebody else, we were the only foreigners there. This was like a local vacation spot. We were the only foreigners, three Black ladies, so we stood out. And one of the guys who was there came to the Mexican gentleman who was with us to ask, like, who are these ladies? And I'm listening at him say, well, she's from this place, she's from this place. And he gets to me and tells this man, I'm from Cuba. Knowing I don't speak Spanish, knowing we've known each other long enough that he knew I wasn't from Cuba. So I think a lot of times there is a disconnect where they're like, the assumption is not American. But then when they do find out I am from the US, it's, for the most part, I've been met with genuine, I think, curiosity of like, oh, where in the US? Why, like, what are you doing here? Like, why did you pick here of all the places you could have gone? So, you know, uh, we've kind of talked about this in a few other videos, but I feel like it's hard to say if somebody is being funny, they funny acting or whatever. Is it because I'm Black, or is it because they think I'm poor, or they think I'm from a poor country? It's a hard thing to tell with 100% certainty. Um, so yeah. Okay. I would love to live in such a way to unload the hypersensitivity I feel daily. I did not, it took me more than a year of living outside the US. And because I left the US in July of 2016, and I went back for like a visit where I wasn't just passing through catching a flight in October of 2018. And I noticed it. I noticed the apprehension coming back, the weight coming back. I hadn't noticed that it wasn't there, but going back to the US this one time, I noticed it and was like, oh wow, like this is a thing. So yeah, it is nice to live a life where I don't have to carry that with me every day. Let's see. Let's see. scrolled up too far, y'all. Okay. Any talk of Russia-Ukraine invasion in Mexico? I am sure there is. But as a non citizen, it is illegal for me to be involved in any protest here. So I've just kind of, you know, whatever's happening is happening. I'm staying out of that because I don't want to get deported. I don't know about this. I've gotten the impression that when Black Americans travel abroad, the folks from other more homogenous countries think we are rich or celebrities because of Black entertainers. I don't know about this. I actually think a lot of people can't put two and two together. The first time I ever got the, but where are you really from? I was at a grocery store in Kuwait, and this guy walked by and he said something, and he was like, Africa? And I was like, no, US. And he was like, no, but like, where are you really from? And it was kind of surreal because in my experience, it tends, all of the situations where that has happened, it's been white people talking to people of various ethnic minorities. Um, and because I grew up in the US, which is ethnic, you know, Americans come in lots of different colors, and Houston, which is the most ethnically diverse place in the United States, my assumption is always that everybody is from there. Unless someone is speaking with like a heavy accent, I would rarely assume they were from somewhere else. And so me and this dude at the grocery store going back and forth, like, yeah, I'm from the US, I'm from Texas. And he's like, no, 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 no. And I thought to myself after this exchange, if these people know Barack Obama, they know Beyonce, they know, you know, I don't know, whoever else, Michael Jordan, like they know those people are Black and American. Why they can't wrap their head around me being Black and American? Like, so I don't know about them thinking we're rich celebrities. I'm thinking they are like, maybe those are the only Black people in the US or the famous ones they know about. And so when they meet us non-famous folks, they're kind of like, what? They got regular Black people too? I don't know. I don't know about that. Are there things you need to remind yourself upon reentry to the US? I don't need to remind myself because I've not been out long enough. I think maybe if I lived outside the US for like 20 years and rarely ever went back, it might be that sort of thing. But unfortunately, it all comes back whether I want it to or not. The feeling of insecurity, of, you know, being afraid, the weight, like it comes back automatically for me, unfortunately. And I wish that was not the case. I wish that was not the case. Um, I think that, yeah, the watching, it's interesting. I was in Ukraine. I was in Kiev and I went to Chernobyl in January of 2020. And while I was walking around the city, I saw Black people and I was like, of all places, y'all here? And so I went and I talked to them, and it turned out that they were students studying. And I just remember thinking, this doesn't seem like a friendly place. Um, I think for the most part, I did okay, but I think that's also because I'm an American. I'm from the US. Um, but yeah, I can't say that I was shocked. I don't think any of us were shocked when we saw them pulling Black and non-white refugees like off the trains and not allowing them to transit through. Um, but I just remember thinking to myself when I was in Kiev, and not that I ran into any problems, but it's a the vast majority of Ukraine is very homogenous, and it just didn't seem like the place I would want to be. Um, yeah. What? Where's a? Uh, what's an example of abusing privilege? I can only speak for me, but if I found myself in a situation where they were treating Black folks who were not Americans not great, but they were like, "Oh, you're an American, you're fine." Like, I couldn't go along with that. I'd be like, "No, why is it okay I can go through, but these people can't?" So, that's the kind of thing that I think, most yeah, got this in Japan. Unless I was in Air Force uniform, Japanese were trying to figure out where I was from. I talked about my experience in China a little bit in one of Stephanie Perry's videos about the worst countries for Black expats. Um, the way, I was going to say the way non white people, no, the way foreigners are treated in China is dehumanizing, particularly for Black people. Um, I never felt like, oh, they're trying to take my picture and it's like I'm a celebrity. No, it was more like, ooh, look at this monkey at the zoo. I can't wait to show my friends this weird thing I saw. That was very much the vibe. Um, so yeah. Yeah, we do have home training about how to conduct ourselves because I have residency in this country and I consider it to be home, but I never lose sight of the fact that I am a guest here. They have been gracious to allow me and to give me an option that would allow me to live here, but I still act like I got some sense and know how to behave. Uh, was a Black American YouTube influencer lives in London who have gotten asked this question by Africans. I like I said, that was the first time I had that, and I think that's been the only time. There have been a couple of times here when I think people thought I might be Cuban or Dominican, and they're like, "But you sure you're not?" Um, but that was the first time where somebody literally said to me, "No, but where are you really from?" And it was surreal because I was like, "This dude is asking me where I'm really from." So that was wild. That was wild. Okay. So, yeah, that's what I guess I've been in kind of a reflective mode because with where the pandemic is and like the city here, this is my most favorite place in the world and we're back to doing some of the things we did when you know, before in the before times. And so that got me to thinking about, this life that I live and what's great and what's not so great. Ah, if you are contemplating a life abroad, make sure that you grab my checklist. I have a checklist of things that you need to consider, things you need to plan for. What are some of the steps you need to take if you are planning a move abroad? If that's you, make sure you grab the checklist. There is a link to it in the description. If after looking at the checklist, you feel like, you know what, I could really use some one on one help working on my plan, figuring out my next steps, I do that as well. There's a link in the description. You can book those at bit.ly/askadelia. Um, so yeah, but if you're thinking about going abroad, make sure you grab the checklist. And I think that's it for me tonight. And I will see y'all next Wednesday. Bye, guys. Maybe not.